Hello, my name is Opal Hope Bennett. I'm the shorts programmer for Doc NYC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Q&A session for the shorts program, All That Matters. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm so really glad to have the filmmakers here with me to speak with you. I'm going to go through and name everyone that's here, and then they will tell you about their films. All right, let's start with Take a Vote by Jaimie Boyle, that's at the head of the program. Sewn by Calvin Mumm. Quiet No More, The Struggles of Reverend Sharon Reicher by Eléonore Hamelin. Leo Hamelin. And The Undocumented Lawyer by Chris Temple and Zach Ingrasci. Did I say your last name right, Zach? Yes, excellent, excellent. So really, really glad to have all of you guys here. Your films all spoke to issues that I think a lot of us are hearing about through the news, and you were able to really hone it into personal stories. So could each of you go through, please, and tell us about your film and how you found your subjects? Let's start with Jaimie.
Sure. I'll try not to take up too much time because I know we're splitting it up. But so my film was Take a Vote, and it was a co-production between myself and the American Civil Liberties Union, which was an absolute honor to work with them and have their expertise on this issue specifically. We basically followed three of the most egregious voter suppression laws across the United States: the photo ID law in Wisconsin, proof of citizenship in Kansas, and the worst of them all, which is felon disenfranchisement in Florida, which is still being contested right now, leading up to what has not yet happened as we record this. So it should be interesting and add a whole new light to it after November 3rd. But we basically, I had been doing work with the ACLU, video work and editing work since the 2016 election. And we had done a lot of short social issue docs, and we wanted to really spend, about 6 months to a year and dive into one issue in particular. And they knew that I had started talking about, voting rights in the 2018 midterm elections. And we decided that since the ACLU was kind of shifting their focus as well, and this amazing grassroots effort was happening on the ground in all these different areas in the lead up to 2018, we thought there's the target. And so it was really just picking from a pile of voter suppression laws all across the country, and there was plenty to choose from and plenty that weren't included, in gerrymandering being a huge one. And so that was a bit mind-boggling, but we felt like through the process we were able to try to, we easily could have ended up with a film with just story after story after story of outrageous voter suppression, and we met amazing individuals along the way. But yeah, it was an incredible journey, and it's all kind of ended up in the film in some small and big ways. So yeah, it's one that feels more relevant now actually than ever, even in 2018, which is always nice in a bittersweet way when that happens with your work. So yeah, that's the gist.
Thank you, Jaimie. Let's go to Calvin with Sewn.
Howdy, my name's Calvin. I made Sewn, which is a documentary. It's a short. Obviously, you're watching this Q&A, you would have seen it, I know. But it's about gun violence, and specifically from the perspective of students in high school and going through it currently. The catalyst that just helped me decide to make this was my short film opens with a story of somebody issue, like a close call kind of gun violence threat. And I was in that same classroom with her in the beginning, and that I was working on creating a documentary. I wasn't sure where I was going to go with it yet about gun violence, and that just kind of set me over the edge. I've been dealing with gun violence throughout my life for a very long time, and I just decided at that point that I just need to share these stories, because every single one of my friends has some story, either small or big, about this issue. And being a student, it's just and seeing my little sister and people like that have to go through this all the time, it's come to the point where if we don't if we don't share these perspectives soon, it's just going to keep building up until every single student has these parts of violence and trauma and experiences that we can't go a day without experiencing. And it's really sad. Like I there's no really good way to frame it, but like every showing this to people who are in my similar demographic, they're like, it's every time I show it to like a new friend I've made here in college, they tell me about the things that have happened at their schools and what they've gone through. And my main goal, like with sharing those stories, is that hopefully, the people, I'm getting to the age where I can vote, but also, we need to get to the politicians, the people in charge, are the leaders of our government, to try and show them that this isn't something that we're just like complaining about. We're not stupid kids. It really is traumatic. And hopefully the sooner, they realize these stories are really impacting their children, then the sooner we'll get to be able to like focus on the bigger issues, besides just, having, maybe we shouldn't have guns in schools, and, maybe this shouldn't be such a prevalent issue and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think the perspective it's simple, but I think its simplicity is what makes it strong. It is unfortunate that these are a lot of very common perspectives, but it's something that I think everyone needs to hear from the voices of people who directly experience it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Calvin, and I absolutely agree with you. Thank you for sharing with us your voice. Let's go to Leo with Quiet No More.
Yeah, so Quiet No More is the story of Sharon Risher, which by now you should have seen in the film. It's very much a portrait documentary. Sharon, so just to contextualize, Sharon Risher's mother was killed by white supremacists in Charleston Church massacre in 2015. And the main narrative after this tragedy really was centered around forgiveness. That's how I met Sharon. I was actually working on a different story, looking for stories around forgiveness. And I immediately thought about the Charleston Church massacre and started looking into people and how, that story of forgiveness that was really public. And what really drew me to Sharon was that she has a slightly different story of what we remember, because she, despite being a pastor, she refused to forgive. She wasn't able to. And so we embarked on a journey with her. We did this first very short piece with her, but we sat down and heard her story. And she's such a charismatic, but also authentic person that it really felt like we needed to spend more time with her and to really have her story in a longer form. So we embarked on this journey, and I'm sure all of you guys have done this before, that we're like, okay, we don't have the budget for this, but we must tell this story because Sharon's voice is too important, especially right now. And even 5 years later, 5 years after this tragedy, I think the way that she embarked on this journey to, I guess her way of dealing with it, of coping with her grief and her loss, was really to become an activist. And she became an activist against gun violence. She's very outspoken about white supremacy and racism, and she shares her story for good. And so as a filmmaker, it's an extremely inspiring story to meet someone like that, and was really happy that she even though she has a tough, she's dealing with a lot of trauma, obviously, that she agreed to have us spend some time with her and create this film. And yeah, it was an honor, really. It was a good experience.
It's a very, very powerful story that you presented. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll wrap it up with Chris and Zach with The Undocumented Lawyer.
So we actually, a close friend of ours who's the main subject of our feature film, that's also a Doc NYC, 5 Years North, was dealing with his immigration case. He's a 16-year-old from Guatemala. And if anyone has been to immigration court, you see these kids representing themselves in court in front of a lawyer. It is heartbreaking. And, you know, you're dealing with immigration law. And so obviously, as our friend was going through his case, we reached out to people for advice, and we saw this amazing New York Times article about Lizbeth Mateo, and she happens to live right next to us. So we set up a meeting. We had this incredible lunch, and as the more we learned about her, not only is she an amazing immigration attorney, she also empowers her clients to fight for themselves. And in today's age, like, that's what you have to do in immigration court. It's so much more than just, you know, having your case heard. So as we, you know, became close with Lizbeth, we knew we just wanted to do anything we could to elevate her story. You know, she is undocumented and a lawyer. She doesn't have DACA, so she could be deported at any time. And for the last 3 years, we've kind of been on this amazing journey with her, as she not only fights her case, but also Adith's case, who's this woman living, like you see in the film, living in the church. And, you know, it's been amazing to have build this team around this film and finally get it out there, especially at a time when, you know, Lizbeth's case was just reopened. And so it's more important now than ever to support her and her work.
Chris, any word from you, or does Zach handle it all?
I know, I think he covered. I just want to give a thank you to the team that made this possible. You know, our producer, Jenna, Kelly, our editor, Lila Place, executive producer, Brenda Villahana, impact producer, Claudia Murray. I mean, there's so many people that go into these pieces, as you know. And then also, you know, Lizbeth, we're sorry she can't be here today to speak with you all, because she is the most incredible speaker. And we've been so thankful to do impact screenings with her, with the American Bar Association, and you know, amazing events set up throughout this fall for her to be able to elevate and tell her story.
That's so brilliant. I'm really, really proud of this program. We had a lot of films speaking to issues of the moment, but I thought this grouping, myself and the shorts programmers thought that this grouping was just such a really resonant mix of not just topic, but also subjects. So I want to speak with Leo and Calvin first, since both of your films are looking at the issue of gun violence, and both of you, interestingly enough, started out focused on telling a different story. And then, you know, as you explained to us, the genesis of your stories, found yourself going in a different direction. And I'd love to hear you speak with us a bit more about that process, because documentary filmmaking is as much a space of, you know, a lot of planning and a lot of research, and you know, spending time with your subjects and making sure that you can develop rapport and so forth. But it's also responding to what it is that you find out in that process. And so I can imagine that that is both, you know, an exciting experience, but also might feel a little risky, and like, you know, you're not sure what you're gonna encounter down that rabbit hole. You both encountered great stories, but can you share with us more about that process, starting out intending to go in one direction and finding that you had to go in a different one? Let's start with Leo.
Yeah, well, that's something that was that I guess, you know, I wanted to do in a very respectful way, that we wanted to do in a respectful way, which is because it is a very public story, but it's also a story, I guess the story that came after the tragedy, the story of forgiveness, I think is a story that has inspired a lot of people. And by no means did we want to change that. But what we felt was interesting with Sharon, and really she carried that energy, is really just her way of looking at it is that there needs to be more to forgiveness, and my forgiveness needs to be an active one. And I can't tell you how inspiring this conception of forgiveness has been to me, and especially in the world as it's been. It's just, I feel like this is so on point with, you know, beyond the symbolic of forgiveness, which for different people mean different things, for, you know, or religiously, or just in your heart, or but just the way that she sees it and the way that she lives it, meaning I'm going to go and talk to everyone I possibly can about my story, even though it's really difficult for me, even though it's putting me in a dark place when I have to relive those moments. I'm going to go and do everything possible to change the world that has created, you know, this tragedy, basically. And I think that's just like very on point. Obviously, she's an activist against gun violence, and I think that's where she's done most of her work. But it's very clear also that her story is a story, you know, of a woman fighting against racism. And she's also, I feel like we had to tell that part of her journey. Felt so necessary to say, you know, she's in a dark place as because she has suffered loss. She was angry, and she used that anger and she channeled that grief to really turn it into a positive force and try to touch as many people as possible. And so that's really something that I think Sharon really drove, and we just embarked with her. And she's such a force of nature. I mean, what she does, I think, takes a big toll on her personal life and on her. It's a difficult thing that she's decided to do. She left completely. She had a job at a hospital. She left all of that life behind her, and instead now she's just become someone who's going to go speak and try to engage with politicians, engage with people. And I'm sure we must have come across around like same or similar organizations, you know, March for Our Lives. She's front and center. She's there in the film, having like a really beautiful moment with Matt Gonzalez and all of the kids from Road to Change, and just seeing how she touches people from complete different parts of the country, complete different generation, etc. I felt like really she was the force that was driving us, and we did not want to dwell so much on the tragedy and on what happened, but really on the force that it created in Sharon, how she was able to move forward from this and do forgiveness in this very active.
So she gave you a different idea of forgiveness than you started
absolutely.
with. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, it's as much as this, I went into this thinking, you know, it was this beautiful forgiveness, how, like, I wanted to learn more. And then I didn't even know what she was going to show me, you know. It's just like, and this felt so powerful. I think that's really something that hopefully people come, you know, get inspired from in the film, is really like forgiveness as an active way of changing the world around you. And I thought that was really a beautiful concept.
Thank you, Leo. Calvin, talk about your transition and your focus on the film.
Yeah. Before I say anything, I have to give a huge thanks to Spy Hop, which is the youth media program that helped me make this. There's nothing I could have done for this process without their support. They really provided an environment. My mentors, Paige Sparks and Pepe Manso, they're great teachers, and the rest of my crew of just high school students getting out there and trying to make something.
He's a high schooler, you guys, FYI.
Well, yeah, that's how I wanted to start this. Is I started this my junior year of high school, and now I'm in my freshman year of college, and I'm voting for the president of the United States. It's a very strange process of making a film about something so kind of that's been so charged in the political commentary over the last few years. Mm-hmm. It's I mentioned this at the end of my film, but this was an issue that was getting bigger and bigger every day we were working on this project. I would come in to like edit the film, and my mentors would tell me would see like, oh wow, new shooting in El Paso over the weekend, and Ohio, and all this stuff. So it took a lot of reflection on my part of like what my feeling as a student was and how I wanted to reflect it. There was a lot of me that I had to separate. I wanted to make sure to separate myself, because I have a history with guns that's very personal, but it's not necessarily what all students feel. And I wanted to get a range of subjects that would feel that, you know, get the general like political spectrum, but also like can speak to the issue that's at hand on a very personal level. These I've spent a while thinking about like if I needed like these star witnesses that have been through like specific things, but that's not necessarily what it's about. It's these are just normal students. They're anybody that you could pick out of a class, and it's definitely like it's not people that have been through specific shootings, but it's the things that have been caused around it. It's, you know, going into class not knowing if someone's going to bust down the door, and you know, another tragedy strikes the news. It's the trauma and the secondary hand trauma that we get from this that I really wanted to showcase, because this is going to be something that, if left ignored, is going to be on an unprecedented scale if we leave it alone. And I think over time, it's definitely it's grown more resonant. I mean, like now we're facing 2020 has been a year where all of these things have come to climax, and now we're waiting to see how this all changes over the next few months. And it's hard to say really where that will go. And I, I think the process for me in that was, it was, you know, it was learning how to communicate this without, you know, this was my first big project. It's very hard to kind of like, you know, speak on like, because I was just, everything I was doing, my process was the first time, and so
Fair.
it was like it's a lot. Most of it was me trying to recognize how I was going to communicate it without really forcing a narrative upon these subjects, but also making sure that they're, you know, it's coming across concisely. And I think how like concisely and powerful it came across is just speaks to how shared this is between all students. I mean, I have friends that love like they love going out on the weekends and shooting in the canyon with their with their guns and stuff like that. And I have people that despise them. I mean, it's but they all agree on some fundamental level that this is an issue that is being overlooked by the people in power. And I think having that come across with the subjects that I talk to just is it speaks to how, you know, concise this subject is, and just how big of an issue it is going to become. And I think that was where the process led me. It was me figuring out like, oh, do I want to, I was kind of like approaching in a very careful manner in the beginning, and wondering like what specific things I need to approach. And yes, it's like, you know, there is that those details that you need to keep in mind, but at the same time, in the end, it's like I could have, there's millions of other students I could have talked to, and it would have it would have a very similar message nonetheless. It's pretty much anyone. Like you really can like talk to most high schoolers in the state, and I really think that
Unfortunately, yeah. Yeah,
that
yeah.
they're going to speak to similar issues. So yeah, I think that's
that was really impactful about the film, actually. Yeah, because it you know, I have not been in high school for some time now, but in watching it, you know, I thought, my God, you know, this is a commonplace worry of American students
Mhm.
nationwide. I mean, it's truly terrible, and you definitely conveyed that quite effectively. So thank you.
Thank you.
Um, so Jaimie, I want to go to you. You mentioned that there was a plethora of issues from which you could have chosen, and indeed, unfortunately, with the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, that is precisely what we find ourselves grappling with. I'm curious as to how you determined the three that you were going to focus on. You know, was it a very difficult choice? Was there another issue that you really wanted to focus on? Clue us in to that process.
Yeah, so, you know, in terms of the issue, at first, voting sounds a little dry. I had just come off of a huge reproductive rights feature about the only abortion clinic in Mississippi. It was very volatile. It was very high stakes, obviously. It was back and forth at the Supreme Court. So, you know, I first heard voting and I was like, wow, that's the least of our worries right now, you know, 2 years into the Trump administration. And, you know, the ACLU quickly knocked that delusion out of my head. And it just became so clear. I didn't realize how bad it was. I knew, you know, it had been in the background of the news. And once I started educating myself, looking at each of these voter suppression laws and how they actually function in the state and swing states, and then all it took really was to look at the timeline of it, how, you know, Obama is elected in 2008, a sweeping measure of voter suppression laws immediately starts passing one after another, and as a backlash. And then, you know, we had just come out of the devastation of 2016, and you start looking at the swing states, okay, Wisconsin, and you see that, you know, you just start with the voter ID law there. And we know that in 2014, at least 300, I have to get my numbers right, at least 300,000 citizens didn't have the right form of ID to vote. Trump won that state by 22,000. And I contacted an activist there, hoping, she was actually was Miss Wisconsin back in her day, had gone on to law school in New York and heard about the voter ID law in Wisconsin and flew home, and now she's Miss Voter Activist across the state and has been doing the work for years, and is the go-to person on the ground there. She was incredible. But I just called her, and she just had story after story after story of these insane instances of having a bus pass, a food stamp card, another government issued ID with your photo on it, with your name, not being able to vote. So targeted, beyond any question of what they were trying to do. There's no room.
For sure.
So it was kind of a similar story. It was like, I started there. I thought, okay, we have to cover Wisconsin. And very quickly I found out about Desmond Meade and Amendment 4 in Florida. And he was leading a ballot initiative to get Amendment 4 on the ballot, which you've watched the film now, so you know what it does. But, you know, it reenfranchises Florida's citizens with prior felony convictions. And in Florida, there are 1.7 million Floridians, or it's, I'm going to get my numbers right, 1 in 4 Black adults in Florida who can't vote because they have a prior felony conviction. And he was leading a fight to get that amendment on the ballot in 2018. And he got it on the ballot. It passes with a supermajority. And immediately GOP lawmakers start putting down new restrictions to block it. So that is a very long way of saying that the more you follow this thread, the more outraged and incensed you get. And it was hard to stop filming at the end of 2018. This was the longest film ACLU had been a part of, the most in-depth. And I was like, we got to keep going. It's just really never ending. And it's really horrifying. And I think the thing that probably many people know, but was kind of new to me, was that every other right that we fight for and every other issue is really dependent on that core right, the right to vote, and all of us participating and having that vote counted. And that had never, I knew it, but it had never really resonated with me in the way that it did after I started looking at those numbers and looking at the election outcomes. And then it really did in a brand new way. So yeah, it was also an honor to tell these stories. And I wished I could include every instance. And I should say too that, the more voters you talk to who haven't been able to do that, the woman who opens the film, we ended up not being able to include this little anecdote, but her mom marched with Martin Luther King and brought her to vote with her as a little girl. And she's now a 90-something-year-old woman. And for the first time in her life, she can't vote. She took her walker a mile down to the polling location. She does not have good health, and it's just left with that, you're speechless. It's just, that should not be the case for anybody. So
definitely not. Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
think I could feel your outrage in the
That's my goal.
but no, you're right. I mean, it is all that matters, right? I actually named the program after I watched your film. I was like, all right, like this is what we need to be talking about, are these issues, because this is, I mean, this is the beginning and the end of it. So thank you. So
Thank
Chris,
you for
Zach,
programming it too.
absolutely. Elizabeth's story, and the fact that she is out front and center about her status made me think of Jose Antonio Vargas' story, which I think was probably the sort of watershed story around this issue, right? Folks, I don't think, had a concept of an individual being in the United States and being undocumented, but it being something that was, you know, not of their own agency, right? And it just opened up, I think, a space where people realized that they needed to educate. I know that was my experience. I saw that documentary. I had a really good friend at the gym. Actually, I was taking this boxing class. It was my whole life, and she was like, "This is me." Like, and she brought me to see this film. It was an amazing personal experience for me, you know, being introduced to this issue. I just bring it up because you know, it was really powerful to see another story where the subject is like, you know, actually in legal, in a vulnerable place legally. But that's what's so powerful, to stand for that posture to tell her story. Where I'm just curious, are there concerns that you have as a filmmaker when you're dealing with a subject who's in that posture? Like, were there things that you had to be particularly careful about or mindful of? And then also would love for you guys to speak a bit about the asylum portion of things. You know, her client that she's helping, who's seeking asylum, and of course in the religious space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you brought up Jose Antonio Vargas. He and his organization, Define American, have actually been really incredibly supportive of this film, have helped watch rough cuts along the way, help make sure that we're telling this story in a way that's sensitive and appropriate because of, again, Lizbeth is at risk. She is entirely undocumented. And as Jose says in his film, there is no line for him to get into and to gain citizenship in the same way that Lizbeth has no access to DACA right now. She's been denied, and there is no line for her to try to seek citizenship. And that's why, for her, when we sat down and we started speaking about potentially making a film together and what that would look like, obviously, we never would want to put her in any sort of position of risk. From her side, she believed that being out front and center was where she was supposed to be, and where she's encouraging many other undocumented people to come out and speak out. And in that way, when you are public, your community can be there to support you. If something happens to you, people will know, people will fight for you. And I think that, that was a message that she shared with us that really resonated. And I think, as Zach said earlier, what struck us so much about her is she is empowering her clients, like her client, like Edith and others, to fight for themselves and to be out there. And so, right now, Lizbeth and Edith are doing tons of these virtual screenings. They're doing interviews. They're out there and speaking to especially law schools and other young undocumented students who might be interested in following a similar path to Lizbeth, but are too nervous. And I think having a role model like that, like I think Jose Antonio Vargas was for so many, is incredibly, incredibly important. And I'll let Zach talk a little bit more about Edith and that process as well.
Yeah, so Lizbeth actually, it's been a pretty amazing collaborative experience with Lizbeth because of those sensitivities. It's not every film you make is such a collaborative experience. And so Lizbeth has really given a lot of her time, not only to be filmed, but also to give feedback on the film. And she actually had recommended Edith be this character. She's so humble that she's like, this film can't just be about me. And so we really started to dive into Edith's case. And I think I was surprised at how, if you look at asylum cases around the country, there's this huge difference in acceptance rates depending on where your case is heard, because judges have so much discretion over your case. And they, the case, Edith's case, for example, her case went up against this judge who had like a 90% decline rate of asylum. So he wasn't really even willing to hear her case. And so when that happens, and there was no alternative. She could not go home. It's dangerous where she came from. And so that's why she decided to take sanctuary in that church. And it was really interesting filming with her, because at the beginning of her taking sanctuary, she was kind of letting other people lead for her, letting other people make decisions for her. But by the time we stopped filming this spring, and you see a little bit in the film where she meets up with her fellow sanctuary seekers briefly in secret, and through that kind of work, this kind of community building, you know, by the end of the film, Medith is for sure the one leading her case. She is the one that is making her own decisions and figuring out the next steps to, you know, survive in this church. And I think, you know, we hope that this film kind of gives a sense of urgency, because there is a woman who's been living in a church for the last 3 years, and the actions we make by voting, by putting the right people into office to make decisions, has huge effect on real people's lives. So you know, I think we learned a lot making this film. We hope a lot of people learn a lot, and we all kind of do what's necessary to make some changes.
Absolutely. That's what we hope. That's what we hope all of you watching this program will take away from the experience of these shorts. We got to wrap it up. We ran over, you guys. Rich conversation. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, audience, for coming to partake of these shorts, and I hope that you will screen some more. Let's say bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, thank
all.
you.
so
Thanks,
much.
Doc NYC.
Thank you.